welcome back to the channel. My name is Crawford. This is Virginia's for Lowriders. And this weekend, we're getting back on the Mazda project. Got to put it out there like we do every time. Mazda, B-Series, tons of work, tons of episodes, over 40, A.D.D problems, O.C.D problems. We're doing it. We're getting it done. We're up to like 40, I don't know, 45 or something like that. 44. I really don't remember now. This weekend, we have the same goal in mind as last weekend. Last weekend we got a little straight away and we ended up doing some other stuff because of the weather. And the weather again this weekend is not the greatest. We did find some damage to the rocker panel last weekend, and I gave a vague explanation of how to fix that. I actually came out here Thursday and again last night and worked on it for a couple hours, and then I got back out here and you can see the garage is completely covered in grinding body dust stuff from removing layers and layers of paint underneath the rocker panels, because it was the 10 layers of paint that we talked about before, plus some really thick rock guard kind of stuff that was sprayed on the bottom of this thing. It probably saved it from rust, but man, that stuff was thick and terrible to take off. The garage was completely smoked up. I didn't record last night. I was out here till like 12:30, I think, just grinding away and hammering, and it looks significantly better than it did last weekend when we started. I did purchase a knockoff Mo clamp, which I'll explain what that is and how to use it, and that actually helped a lot. But this weekend, the plan is I'm going to juggle body work and other things that need to be done that are mechanical and wiring and stuff. Like I said before, I get straight away, and the A.D.D stuff, it's pretty bad. Like, I'll show me doing something like the brakes. We had a whole day. We talked about brakes. We talked about brake lines and how to make them, and I never finished it. I still have to make the one that goes under the cab, and I have to make the one that connects to that one that goes under the cab. Same thing with wiring. We've done wiring like 30 times. I still have to wire up the sensors on the engine. I still have to wire up the distributor. I still have to wire up the fans. It's how it goes, I guess. I started wiring the stuff from the dashboard to the taillights. Never finished that. So there's a lot of little things that need to get done. The cab being painted holds back a lot of things also. So the plan is, I read the MSDS sheet from the primer this morning. The bare metal needs to be in 180 or 120. I have 180. There's a lot of grinding marks in it from the previous owners that I have to get out. It's 2K primer, so it fills a little bit, doesn't fill everything. So we need to get everything sanded down, prepped, and hopefully primed by tonight or tomorrow, while I'm laying thin amount, like the slightest amount of body filler, say on this rocker panel and on the top of the cab. While that's hardening, I'm going to try and juggle other things because I can't just work on that stuff. My mind doesn't allow me to just concentrate on that and get it done. I don't know what it is. It's impossible. So we're going to, I'll add the time lapse and stuff from this week. I'll go over the clamp thing, the Mo clamp. And we're just going to get after it. We're going to keep knocking away at the list. There's still 3 pages of things to do on that list, and a lot of them pertain to cab related things. Still got to get a lot of layers of paint off, and I need to stop rambling, and we're just going to get to work. So if you've never been here before, go check out all the old videos. Don't forget to subscribe and do all the normal YouTube-y things. I ramble, I apologize, it's part of it, but hopefully y'all stick around and go check out the other ones. So I'm going to shut up now, and we're going to get into actually getting something done. Does some weird stuff to the beard. All right, I gotta learn. I really need to learn when to just stop and then put body filler on it instead of trying to make it perfect, because you'll literally never see the spot, and it's probably gonna get beat up from dragging and everything else. So I got under there, and it's been like 2.5 hours now. I didn't realize until I was working on the other side that this rocker panel, hopefully it's not making any noise, this rocker panel actually has a curve in the sheet metal here. Last weekend, whenever I discovered that this was crushed in and had a big gouge in it and all that, I was fixing it as if this was supposed to be rounded, which wasn't a big deal. I have an addiction to body hammers, and I have all kinds of shapes and sizes, so I was able to massage this all the way down after it's pulled down and correct it for the most part. As you can see, these little dark spots are indentations, but they're very light. It's not like it's a if I fill it from here, it's not like I'm packing it full of filler. So one of the things that I wanted to explain, Mo Clamp is a brand, and it's, I guess, the most popular version of this. This from that company is like $200. I can't justify it. I don't do body work for a living, even though I have a ridiculous amount of things for my at-home toolkit or whatever. But these are very simple. So on a frame machine, this would be pulled. But general idea is you put it up onto the sheet metal, you tighten this down, and the more pressure you put on here, it pulls the clamp apart. You can see here it's tapered, it pulls the clamp apart and actually puts more pressure on the teeth. I just figured I would show this because these are like $20 or $35. They have different sizes and shapes on Amazon. Things like this, I can't think of any other way that I would have been able to pull this quarter panel down without touching anything else on the truck. All I did was clamp this on here, got a long pry bar, put a block of wood against the frame rail, and I was able to use that as my pivot. So if you run into any scenarios like this, like say this panel up here was crushed in, again, you could clamp this guy onto the sheet metal. If the truck ran, you could tie it to a tree, tie it to another vehicle, whatever you need to do. Of course, if you don't have access to a frame machine. But yeah, I just figured I'd show y'all. It's a relatively inexpensive tool with, I mean, it's pretty awesome, the ability that it has. I've looked at buying the Mo Clamp brand for a lot of years. I could never bring myself to spend the money. And then I found out that you can buy a knockoff version off Amazon. I was all about it. It doesn't look too hateful. It's definitely not perfect. I think it's good enough for what we're trying to accomplish here. I have some kitty hair Bondo that I'll probably put on there first because everything is kind of roughed in with a grinder and A.D. grit, and I don't feel like going through the process of trying to reduce that to a higher grit. So we're going to do a base coat or a base skim with that, and then sand that completely, and then go over top of that with some finish filler. That's the plan. You know what I hate more than body filler? Is kitty hair body filler. It makes such a terrible, terrible mess. But it's tough. And this flimsy rocker panel needs something. Like I said, this is just a skim. as much as you can skim kitty hair. Oh, this stuff's terrible. This is a bad idea. What? Oh, come on. This is the last time I will use this stuff in my life. It is terrible. I haven't used it since I was in my teens. And I don't remember it being this terrible. This is terrible. It's been a few hours. I've been sanding and spreading a little bit of mud here and there. One thing I wanted to mention for those that might attempt to tackle this. So there was, again, 7, 10 layers of paint all over this thing. Those 7 or 10 layers, one of the problems was why I needed to remove the windshield. They were caked into here. But another place that they're caked into is this drip edge right here. So there's baby blue, black, white, primer, in the factory. I'm not sure if it's called seam sealer, but that's one of the things. I'm going to remove all of the factory sealer that goes in between here, remove all of that paint, get this down to bare metal, bodywork everything, and before I paint it, I'm going to seam seal this whole edge. And the reason, which I did this other side, and I'll show you all that too. The reason you want to seam seal it is this is actually a pinch weld. So this is the bottom of the roof skin for this portion of it. This is the top, and you can see these little welds here. And if water sits in between that edge, water will eventually try to make its way underneath that roof. So I'll go through, I'll show you how I remove it. It's really simple, and it really doesn't cost very much. I was at Harbor Freight this morning, and you can buy like a 6-pack of wire brushes for like $4. And I just put them on a drill. Drills have enough torque. You don't need any specialty tools. Most people have some form of a drill laying around. It comes out relatively easy. It's pretty quick. You see there, nice, clean, shiny, ready to go. One thing to keep in mind, if you do use a wire brush for taking off any paint, whatever rough surface that a wire brush creates is not good enough to primer over. You have to sand it again with a DA, because if you try to go over top of the scratches that this thing creates, you're gonna see it when you get done, pretty much. All right, back to sanding, drilling, wire brushing, chipping away. I was going to go into detail about the grits that I use and the products that I use and all of the things. But the more I thought about it, there's a ton of channels that go on and on and on and on about this stuff. I am not a professional body guy. I hate what I'm doing right now. I cannot stand using body filler. I know that it's necessary in some cases, especially like this mangled thing that I got somewhat straightened out. But there's a lot of different brands, and a lot of brands use different grits and different processes. The process, or the grit and process that I'm using on this one is completely different from other brands, like, or other, even this company sells, I don't know, 20 different types of body filler. In this process, it is recommended to have an 80 grit raw steel. This stuff is perfectly fine to go direct to metal, but not all body fillers are. So if you go to tackle this, just make sure you look at the MSDS or the product information sheet or whatever that company might call it. I find it easiest when I'm doing something to just Google the MSDS because it tells you exactly what it's made out of, it tells you exactly the process for applying that product, temperatures and everything. Don't just wing it and use, ooh, almost fell off the table. Don't just wing it and use whatever you think you can use or what you've used in the past, because this body filler needs an 80 grit raw steel. The stuff that I use for finished body filler requires a 180. So each product's completely different from each other. And they also require different temperatures of application. I need to take my jacket off because I cranked up the heat in here. It is getting toasty. I am trying to put this on as thin as possible. I do not want a bunch of it around this outer edge, and I do not want to try to block sand that outer edge because this stuff moves so much because this roof is so jacked up and so flimsy. All I'm doing is filling the minor imperfections that I just couldn't reach and get to with the body spoon. I am putting it on very, very thin. I'm making a bunch of passes, but all I'm doing is trying to smooth it out. So don't think of it as me caking it on there. As I'm swiping this, you can actually see the sheet metal through it in spots. I don't know if I don't have it turned the right way right now, but yeah. We're trying to avoid the outer or inner edge because it's not necessary, because most of it gets covered up by the aluminum thing. And we're trying to put it on nice and thin so that way we don't have to sand it all back off. I am in no way whatsoever great at this. Like I've told everybody that I know, I would much rather spend 5 hours beating on something rather than 30 minutes sanding something. And I'm already at the end of my sanding. I'm just done with sanding. That's what it is. But I got a lot more to do, because after all this is on there, and then all of the body filler sanded, the primer's got to go on, and the primer has to get sanded. So there's a whole lot of sanding to do in the next few days. Because again, I don't know why I did this to myself, but I'm trying to get this thing to mini nats with at least the cab painted. I don't care if the truck's painted. I don't even care. I'm not gonna bring the bed, and it'd be cool if it ran, but there's no telling if I'll get that far. Yeah, I think I'm actually misspoke. Even the kitty hair stuff requires 80 grit before you sand or before you apply it. This stuff requires 80 grit before you apply it. The primer that I'm using requires 180. So I'll show all the products that I'm using later, maybe at the end of this if I get to the point of actually priming it. Again, you don't have to use these products. You don't have to follow the guidelines. I'm just reading what the manufacturer recommends. There's this huge debates online if you should put body filler on top of raw steel, or if you should put primer sealer on there, or if you should self-etching primer. There's like tons and tons and tons of information and 1,000 ways for people to say you're doing it right or you're doing it wrong. I'm just doing it the way that I've done it, and it's worked. I haven't had any issues, so don't take this as a how-to. Form your own opinions on the processes of how this all works, because there's a lot of information when it comes to this stuff, and you have to form your opinion if you think that there's a right and a wrong way of those processes, I guess, because you could be the guy that says it doesn't make sense to put it on top of the primer. That's the way I feel. I don't personally like putting the filler on the primer. It seems weird to me. But again, everybody has their opinions on this stuff. It gets really deep on the internet on the right and wrong ways of going about this. It is like 12:30 now. I'm going to bed. But we got a little skim coat on the whole roof. Again, tried to avoid the center as much as possible. I got it on some of it, but it's really thin. This is main reason for trying to avoid the center, because this stuff is so flimsy, and I know that I can't block sand something that constantly moves. So this is new to me. I've never cut a giant hole in a roof like that and tried to body work around it. But the part that's relatively rigid, that's what we're worried about, because that doesn't get covered up. And there is a skim coat. Like I said, it's very, very thin. It's not caked on there. Went through, started to block the portions I put on first, and that's looking pretty good. That stuff's still setting up, and I give up. One thing I was gonna say that I learned, actually this is a little tacky still. Whenever I'm doing this, instead of trying to wipe every single bit of this filler off of your spreader, I let it dry and just crack it off, rather than trying to wipe that. Like when it's like this, all it does is spread, and then you have to sit there and pick at it. If you let it dry, you can break it off in big chunks. So again, I'm not a body guy, but I can give a little bit of how-to, or whatever you want to say. When the body filler is almost dry, take a razor blade. Actually, this is already set up. Take a razor blade just to cut down on the dust and the sanding and the concentrating on the little ridges. This is really hard to do with a camera in my hand and only using one hand. But you get the idea. You can take a razor blade and cut down the ridges. That way you're not hyper-fixating on trying to get that ridge to go away, especially if you don't do this very often, and it'll save a little time. All right, it's Sunday. I won't be able to work on the truck all day today. I gotta do grocery shopping, cut the grass, normal house stuff. So I'm gonna try and get as much as I can get done in the next few hours. I think the plan is to sand. If I can get this thing like as close as possible to being ready to prime, I can prime it this week. looking at the weather, it's supposed to get about 15 degrees higher than what it is, or what it's been the last couple days. So it'll be good, almost perfect weather. It's supposed to rain. We'll use the mini split to suck out as much of the humidity in here as possible and just crank up the heat right before painting, I guess. But I'll at least feel comfortable to where I don't have to run the mini split the entire time to keep it up to temperature because it'll be warm outside. So at least that's what I'm going for. And maybe after it's primed in the next few days, maybe I can get it painted after that. The primer that I have, you are supposed to sand after it dries, so I can't do wet to wet. So it'll be prime, let it dry for a day or so, block sand, and then hopefully paint and clear. And maybe it'll go to mini nats without doors and a bed, and we'll just rock maybe some front fenders. I was really hoping to be way further along than this. Saying that I was going to bring is a pretty terrible idea for the short amount of time that I had to work with, especially finding the roof is crushed in and the quarter panel's crushed in. Between those two things, that's like a solid 4 days worth of work just in straightening the metal, not in anything else that had to do with it. So let's get back to work. So I'll put a mask on in a few minutes. Just wanted to talk about this before so you can actually hear me and not listen to me all muffled. I have powdered guide coat. I was going to show y'all both, but like everything else, I have no idea where it's at in my garage. So this is guide coat. This is actually made to do this. It dries really quick. This is not just normal black spray paint. Normal black spray paint, in my experience, gums up sandpaper, and it's terrible. I would much rather spend the extra $5 or whatever it is for a can of this because it goes a long way. This can still feels full, and I've already done a truck with this. I'll actually add some videos of the last thing I painted for my buddy's dad. It was a nightmare. It turned into basically a restoration of a vehicle, but turned out pretty decent at the end. So I'll hit this with guide coat. Initially, I'm going to hit it with 120 to take off the, I don't even know what you'd call this, almost the shiny sheen film of this. Again, I'm not a professional. This is just what I do, and I'm explaining it so that it makes sort of sense. Don't use it as a how-to. There's a lot of body shop channels. Hit it with the guide coat. This is just a reference so you know where you sanded and you know that you don't over sand for no reason. It doesn't have to be completely covered in it. Wait for that to dry for a few minutes or seconds. It doesn't take very long. It's pretty quick. And it gives you a, just like the Dicom we talked about in the other video, it gives you a clear, obvious representation of where you've already sanded and where you need to sand. I'll actually get a smaller block to do sections of this, but just on that few seconds of sanding, you can see already that this is relatively smooth already. And just like the Dicom, any dark spots that are left are low spots, and low spots need to be filled or they need to be hammered. And obviously, we're already moving along pretty quickly, and hopefully won't take very much. Hopefully, I don't really have to do anything more than a fine glaze putty at the end just to fill any kind of voids that I might have gotten in there when using this filler. think I'm at the end of what I can do today. I have sanded and sanded for probably 4 or 5 hours now. I've gotten some things that are completely finished. Some of these edges that had little dings here and there that it wasn't worth slide hammering out because they were so shallow. So I just skimmed the whole thing. I mean, that stuff is very, very thin. I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to take all of that kitty hair off because none of it is hard yet. Like, it's still kind of sticky. I got a final glaze coat on this portion. That side's completely sanded, I believe. I think it's done. This has a small skim coat on it, so this needs to be blocked. Same thing on the other side. This has been blocked and it's nice and smooth. Same here along the back. Like I was saying, this is pretty good. This needs to be hit with 180 to get the final scratches out of it, so the primer will stick to it properly. I believe this is done, or as done as I'm gonna make it, because like I keep saying, this flimsy crap, I feel like no matter how straight I get this, it's all gonna change when that frame is bolted to this thing, because it's gonna do whatever it wants to do. Hopefully when it's all bolted up and sandwiched, there's no low spots, but really, I don't know. So I was going to add this at the end of the video because it doesn't actually pertain to the truck at all. I had a subscriber a couple months ago hit me up, asked me about this steering wheel that I had that came off the truck, and then I've had a couple people comment about the steering wheels. Then I had a guy message me about the steering wheels, and recently a guy was begging me in the comments that I don't remember his name, so sorry. I haven't had a chance to go back and look. People see these. I have all of this random stuff in the background of my little garage, and for whatever reason people are attracted to the steering wheels that have been stacked over on my metal brake. I actually went through my sea containers this morning. I didn't realize how many steering wheels I've actually owned. It's kind of weird that I've accidentally hoarded a bunch of wheels. I didn't even know how that happens, but I have a lot. So we're gonna go over them real quick because people ask me to see them. Just a generic, I think this is an old Grant, and it is definitely old. This is a 62 Falcon off of a 62 hardtop Falcon that I used to have that my buddy Kevin ended up with, and oddly enough, back in the day, Kevin has a problem with finishing things, and he never watches these videos anyway, but he bought the Falcon from me. He bought an R32 Skyline. Pretty sure it's a 32. Skyline, complete drivetrain, motor trans, rear end, everything. If I can dig through my pictures and find it, I'll show you where he got to it. Everything was in the car. Motor trans, rear end. He built the frame from scratch. The car was pretty much done, and then Kevin started talking to this girl, and then you all know what happens with that stuff. Girls change your minds, and he stopped working on it. So I was able to save some pieces off of the car. It eventually went to scrap, and the motor and the trans and all that stuff was pulled out of it. This is one of the pieces I saved because it's in decent-ish shape. It's not falling apart. It's cracked, not falling apart. This, it's called the 500. This came off of an arcade game that I found in an alleyway back in the day in my old area. Back in the day, it was pretty crappy where we grew up at, and there was a lot of random things abandoned, and this was on an arcade game that was turned into basically dust. So I yanked it off because I thought it was cool. Random, old school, lowrider chain steering wheel. As you can see, they're both, I think, like 10 or 12 inch wheels. They're very small. This is the wheel that the subscriber asked me about. This was actually on the Mazda. This truck used to have, again, I'll add some more pictures, bag plate flame things all over it. The truck was completely covered in flames. I cut all that stuff off when I redid the suspension, so it didn't really make sense to keep this on the truck. There's nothing else that's on this truck that is shiny billet aluminum. So I purchased my dad drives an IROC Camaro from the 90s wheel, and I want to be like him. That's just what this thing screams to me. 90s, 80s mullet machines. Okay. Random Grant wheel. It's kind of rough, very old. Back before stance cars were a thing, I used to have a Civic wagon. I used to be a Honda guy in my teens, and back in the day when you used to be able to Google cambered cars and stance and all that, and it was first becoming a thing where there was like no results, I tried to be one of those kids, but I didn't have any money, so this was part of that car. I'll add another picture. This was purchased in intentions on going on my Model A. I didn't realize it had these weird nipple things on the back when I ordered it, because the Speedway listing didn't show any of that. It's still kind of cool. It's very, very light. It's aluminum. Eventually will end up in a Model A, I believe, along with some aluminum seats that will be dimple dyed. I might even make the seats from scratch. I'm not totally sure. This was kind of funny. I messaged a lady on Marketplace. She had this thing listed. She said, I'll meet you at the racetrack near me. I get to the racetrack and I'm saying, I'm here. And the gates weren't open and nobody was there. So she sent me an address, and it turns out she was at the other racetrack that she owned. It ended up being a go-kart track. I didn't even know there was a go-kart track that was still operational in the area. But this goes on a go-kart, apparently, like a shifter cart. I don't know anything about those things. But it's a steering wheel. It's lightweight. It's aluminum. It might end up even on the Model A. Be kind of weird to add something from a shifter cart, but it's essentially the same thing as this. These are hanging up there. These aren't actually steering wheels. This is off of a hose reel for an indoor fire hose crank of some sort. I found this at a scrapyard attached to the reel still. I just thought it was cool. Same scrapyard this came from. I actually bought both of these with intentions on using them on my slip roller. Show you all that real quick. I have this very, very old slip roller. I bought some tools from an auction, and all of the tools are well over 100 years old. This is I think a Niagara. So I chopped the end of it off because it had a wooden handled crank on it, and the wood was all just dry rotted and ate up. So I cut that off, welded on a quick release for like a circle track car to where I can add this thing onto the end of it and use the slip roller with ease rather than trying to remake the crank thing. And my garage is so small, I put the quick release on there, so whenever it's not in use, it just stays on there and it's out of the way-ish. That's all I got for this weekend. I thought we were going to get into some other stuff, but surprisingly, I sanded the whole time. My back is not happy about it, and my mentality of doing these things isn't happy, but we made progress. It's looking pretty good. Hopefully I can get it in primer. Hopefully I can get the garage cleaned up, because I got to get all of this nasty body dust that is caked all over everything in here. It's thick. So I got to get all of that completely sanded and everything completely cleaned, and then tarp off everything, and hopefully in primer in the next few days. That way I can paint it by next weekend. That way I can hopefully push it on a trailer the weekend after that and come hang out with you all guys. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, do other normal YouTube things. Again, if you've never been here, go check out the other ones. There's a lot of them. I'm gonna go outside and work until it's time to pass out.